Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. This session starts at 10:30, just a couple minutes. It is Rebuilding Trust, Turning Around a Cybersecurity Program from the Inside, from Brian McDonald at Neurion. He's the Director of Cybersecurity. Brian is experienced an IT security leader with 17 years of information technology, security management, and delivery experience. Proven leadership roles, including director, senior principal, senior manager, security architect, operational technology, cybersecurity manager. He's got extensive industry experience working with Fortune 500 companies and the Department of Defense in IT, OT security initiatives. He also has strategic and functional leadership, specializing in IT, OT security operations and global deployment of IT, OT security infrastructure. Brian, welcome to Houston.
Yeah, thank you for having me. He just went over my intro, which I did have a slide for, so I'm not going to go over that again. But what I'm going to be talking about today is my experiences as a consultant, how I dealt with challenges coming out from the outside, my personal journey of stepping into this internal role I'm currently sitting in, what I saw, and how I began to turn things around. I do have a couple of things I'd like to start off with. One, this is how the perception of how I saw things, so people in the company might have seen it differently. And two, I would like to apologize for my monotonous voice. I understand that can put people to sleep, and for all the stock images you're going to see today, because I am not good at PowerPoints. So I'd like to start off with a question for someone who's a little bit more junior in their role, someone who's like 5 years. What's our responsibility as cybersecurity professionals? Raise your hand if you have less than 5 years in cybersecurity, or do I have a bunch of experienced professionals in here? All right, you with the headphones. Yeah. What do you think we're supposed to be doing as a cybersecurity professional? Securing things digitally. Yeah, that's a good answer. And that's kind of what my answer was 10 years ago. It's like we need to stop, people from doing things to get us hacked. But this perspective was very narrow, and it led to a lot of frustration on my end when people just didn't listen to what my requirements were or my architectures. So I would take a lot of personal responsibility on that I shouldn't have been doing. My answer now as an enlightened professional is that we should be enabling the business to create value. One of the most important lessons of my career was to stop taking it personally when no one listened to me. Cybersecurity in the corporate world does not exist to say no. It exists to enable the business to move more forward securely. My role is to identify risks, explain the potential impact in clear business terms, and to give them strategies to eliminate or reduce the risk. If I decide not to act, it becomes a documented business decision and not a personal failure on my part. This shift in mindset really helped me break out of a lot of spirals of frustration. And instead of focusing on whether or not every recommendation was followed, I really focused on what the business had in terms of information and context to make an informed decision on whether or not to do something. And if there's one thing I want you to walk away from this talk, that's how we should be operating as security professionals, in my opinion. So, now on to what I saw from the outside looking in. These are some pretty common unprofessional security patterns I've seen over the years at companies big and small. Security is a grenade. It's where you start tossing your requirements over the fence and say, just deal with it. This works pretty well for you if you don't have a lot of time, but it leads to a lot of frustration on the IT or the OT side of the house when they don't know how they can actually meet your requirements, why your requirements are there, and if there's anything else they can do to maybe not meet it, but still meet the same security objectives. I don't think a lot of people do this maliciously. It's just they don't have a lot of capacity to actually sit in every meeting and explain everything. But, you don't actually have to come up with requirements that fit for solution. You just have a one catch-all that you don't have to really explain. Or you can go on the our way or the highway, where you're saying, I know what's right, so you don't, so listen to what I say. There's a temptation there where you think you know an application better than actual subject matter experts. You claim that everything that needs to be encrypted at rest, using quantum-resistant encryption technology. But it's a Windows 98 server. It doesn't need that kind of resistance to attacks. It probably can't even hold that encryption. So no one's going to take you seriously if you start having requirements that don't fit the actual need of the solution. But there's the actual exact opposite of just paper exercises, where you just let everyone run roughshod over you, and you just start documenting everything out. And it just becomes a paper exercise for cybersecurity. I know earlier I said that's kind of what helped me break out of frustration, of a cycle of frustration. But you need to actually do some things to the left of identifying risk and to the right to mitigate that risk down to an appropriate risk appetite level. And finally, no formal processes. This one is hell for me. It's very stressful to operate in. No one knows what people are really doing. No one knows how to bring you in or why and what you're doing from a day-to-day basis. You're no way to ensure that what you're doing can even be repeatable. So if someone, say an IAM architect leaves the organization and they're the only ones that have the tribal knowledge, you're really in a FUBAR situation if AD goes down. But there is no reason to have everything be very rigid and bureaucratic. You just need a solid foundation to let people know how to engage you. So how does this affect your program? You're going to start leading into a communications breakdown. No one's going to want to deal with you. You're going to be like a smelly kid at lunch. Everyone's going to avoid you. You're not going to be brought into any security meetings. You're not going to be invited to any projects. You're not going to know what the hell is going on in your organization. Or hostility. So let's say you do get brought in or you just shove your way into a conversation. It's just going to be felt with a lot of resistance. There's going to be some shouting matches. People are going to be asking, why the hell are you here? What are you bringing value? And why are we doing the things that you say we need to do? Or it will erode trust. So you will say something like, you need to have DMZs in your OT levels. And they'll say, well, why do we need that? It just, it's not efficient. We could just have a direct connection to IT and not have all this additional cost spend. Which then brings us to elevated risk. With all of these going on in your program, vulnerabilities are going to go unaddressed, controls are going to get bypassed, and vulnerabilities are starting to pile up because they're not going to be bringing you into the conversation, and you're not going to be part of the process early enough to prevent it from happening in the first place. So, what advice did I give from the outside looking in? I told them to know thyself. Well, not really, but what I did was dig into these three areas when working on a project with my clients. You can't really help others if you don't help yourself. So you need to know how you're working with your stakeholders. What's the vibe of the meeting that you're in? You need to start paying attention to the room. Are the stakeholders asking questions on how to implement what you're requiring or the potential improvements to make it more secure than what you're already bringing to the table? Or are they just questioning why you're at the table in the first place? A vibe will tell you more about the effectiveness of your program than actual any status report you're going to get from a consultant. But also, good vibes don't really matter if nothing gets done. If you're not meeting all of your objectives, you're not adding value. And if you don't even have objectives written down, that's a bigger problem. And also, are you treating risk pragmatically? Nothing outside of strict regulatory mandates in some instances, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. Your job is to find some solutions that work for the business to move forward without some unnecessary friction. And not every hill is worth dying on. You need to pick your battles. I've seen people argue about encryptions on test databases filled with junk data when they had their OT network showing up on Shodan. There's a bigger risk there. And you need to know what's in your tool belt. You need to, it's not enough to know how you interact. You also need to know what you're working with. What tools do you actually have, and are they being used effectively? Or are they just there to check a box for insurance reasons? What processes are documented and repeatable versus tribal knowledge? And most importantly of all, do you have the right people with the right skills doing the actual right job? Knowing your arsenal, which is people, process, and technologies, is the difference between hoping your security program is working and then knowing it works. And as you can see in this know thyself quadrant, those unprofessional security practices really fall in the good vibes where there's no delivery, utter chaos where nothing's being done, or just shelfware and silence where you have tools but they're not doing anything. And you really want to be a trusted partner. Another piece of advice I gave was to know your stakeholders. And in OT, your stakeholders aren't just IT executives or IT managers or technical people. They're also the people running and maintaining the plant day to day. You need to know your plant managers who care about production targets. Engineers will care about process stability. You also need to know who in the plant, who is who in the plant in order to get their buy-in. And you will need support from all the way from the plant director down to the SMEs, because the plant director is just going to listen to their SMEs and not you. And these next two are pretty codependent, respecting the mission and speaking their language. If you come in trying to talk about patch cadence, CVSS scores, 0 days, or your security maturity journey, they're not going to give a shit. You're going to need to start framing it in like risk terms that they understand. Like, what happens if this PLC goes down during a batch run? How much production are we going to lose if the network between sites fail? How much is that going to cost the company? And could a compromise lead to a safety incident that gets OSHA involved? And then you need to engage on the floor. OT doesn't come, getting your presence known through a monitor. You actually have to walk the shop floor and get to know the layout of the plant. You also need to dress the part, so you don't come looking like me right now when you go to a plant. Everyone's going to laugh at you. And then you also need to know the business. How can you properly secure something and have the right controls in place if you don't know how valuable that piece of equipment is to the company? And you shouldn't frame your requirements as dictations coming from on high, so you can achieve your goals as a security professional. You need to frame them so you can make sure you show them that they know that you're making the plant more resilient. So as a consultant, I have the luxury of doing all this from the outside, kind of like the security as a hand grenade. I'm like, this is all the shit you should be doing, and then walk away and not actually have to implement any of it. So I've been at Nurion for the past year, and I really wanted to join this program to start something from the beginning and finish it off, see something in a very immature state and bring it all the way to a mature state without having to walk away and see if my strategies are actually sound. So how did I do that? Well, like any good leader, when I first walked in the program, I had made a 30-60-90 plan. It's nothing very revolutionary. But in the first 30 days, I wanted to know how we're doing internally. How did we see ourselves? How were my people actually interacting with our stakeholders? I would sit down on meetings in the room without me actually joining to see how the communication styles were. And I wanted to know if our strategy was aligned with the business and the plant. Are we actually saying things that would make their lives easier and having it on a roadmap, or are we just trying to make their lives more difficult for no reason? At the 60-day mark, I really wanted to get to know my stakeholders. And as the Director of Cybersecurity Architecture and Engineering at Nurion, my remit is both across IT and OT. So it's both getting everyone to know everyone on the IT side, but it's also getting to know the plant managers and the regional directors. I wanted to see how they actually saw our program was interfering with their work, if there was any pain points, and also like what were we doing that they saw that was right. And the 90-day mark, I wanted to have personally reviewed all of our cybersecurity tools and configurations. We were a pretty lean shop, and I wanted to see what was being told to me versus what reality was. And in the end, those are really two different things from what I found that I can't really get into here. But these were all my observations after these first 90 days. There was a shit ton of hostility. When we were in meetings that I wasn't on the actual agenda for and just sitting in the room, there was a lot of yelling, and there was a lot of, well, why are we doing this? Why are you telling me to do this? I don't want to do this. So we're met with pretty high resistance. In one instance, I was actually on a meeting. People were openly venting in Teams chats. They didn't know they were sharing on the screen. They didn't know that I had someone on my team that could speak the local language. So I got a nice translation of what they were saying. I also saw that we weren't really involved early enough. Everything that we were learning, it was going on secondhand from like an IT administrator instead of project managers or program directors. By the time we got involved and we injected ourselves into that process, everything was already done. So we were just highlighting what risks there were and saying, well, this should be fixed, and being told, well, no, that will increase project deadlines, so it's not happening. But what guidance that we did have was pretty razor thin. But beyond some pretty basic password policies, there were no clear controls or standards to guide the organization to migrate to the cloud, to implement a DMZ between IT and OT. And then our operating model was pretty broken. Our office was held accountable for plant security, where the responsible party to actually make those changes were the plant personnel. And sometimes they got shoved down to engineers or even chemists. Now, those people are pretty damn smart, but cybersecurity and knowing how to patch, systems isn't their day-to-day job. And so we had a really big disconnect of where we should be as a company versus where we are, and that led to a lot of frustration on everyone's part. And then our GRC process was broken as hell from the way we tracked risks, documented them, and who was part of those conversations. The business was not involved in risk management from the OT cybersecurity, the IT cybersecurity side of the house at all. So these were my perceptions of why this was happening. There's no real executive buy-in from leadership. They were told by previous administrations that their architecture was sound. They had standards that they relied on that were pretty out of date, that weren't really fit for purpose. And then we had some wrong people in key roles. Some people just honestly weren't the right fit. They're either too junior in their careers, and they didn't have enough support to help them succeed in those roles. And that was through no fault of their own. So for us, overall, our security patterns that I saw that we were having in my team was a combination of paper exercises, wrong tools in the tool belt, and no formal processes. So what did I do? I defined a strategy. When I came in, if I just kept on trying to, hammer out the whack-a-mole at all the symptoms of a lack of a comprehensive OT cybersecurity strategy, I'd be doing it constantly. So we needed a roadmap for IT. The CISO office was already anchored onto this Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. It gives a good, broad, business-facing framework that leadership understands and auditors will expect. But for OT, we're using the same thing. So I wanted to lean on C2M2 to base our maturity standard, our controls off of, so we can meet maturity standards. It's made by the Department of Department of Energy, if you didn't know, and it's really good for OT organizations because it sets a good pace for where OT maturity needs to be. But aligning these two sides to the right maturity models, we could start telling our executive leadership that there is a key difference between how you treat IT and how you treat OT. I started giving credit where it's actually due. As practitioners, we know that it's pretty easy to walk into a program and point to everything that's broken. But that kills morale and makes people tune you out pretty fast. So what I learned to do is deliberately recognize what's going right, whether that's a well-configured tool, a process that was actually followed by the plant, or just a team with good intent. They're trying to make things more secure, but they just didn't meet the standard. Calling out these wins will really build trust, and it shows you're paying attention and not there just to tear people down. But when I did find something that was wrong, you don't call their baby ugly. We've all been, in a meeting or a design process where we see something that's so busted it makes you question reality. And there's a temptation there to start unloading on them and to tell how dumb they are. At least maybe that's just me. But nothing breeds hostility faster than making people feel dumb. I like to take a softer approach these days. I acknowledge the effort. I show why it's not achieving the outcome that we're looking for, and we need to focus on how to achieve security. People typically don't resist change in their ways of working because they're trying to be difficult. It's because we're either not bringing them along or they're feeling redundant. And then to fix these things, we need to start actually leading with risk and not, well, you're not using the wrong encryption algorithm or you need a DMZ. A big shift was having these risk-based conversations. So we'd start saying, here's the risk this creates, here's how severe it is, and here's your options to address it, which either can be eliminate, mitigate, or accept. And that framing really put the decision where it belongs. It's with the business. It's not with IT managers or your local IT support. They don't get to make that decision. The plant director or the business owner does. And so that turns it from being like an emotional conversation of you're doing something wrong to you're presenting a risk to the company and you either need to accept it or you need to mitigate it. And finally, you need to make standards actually usable. I think we've all seen 80-page PDF documents that collect dust that no one implements, let alone reads. So we took our standards from NIST 853, we took from 882 and IEC 62443, and we actually, made them human readable. And we sat with the plants and our IT people and go, do you understand how this control works, control by control? Here's the controls that we can bend on, here's the controls that we can't. And that really helped us to start laying that ground framework for senior leadership to understand how these controls affect the plant and increase resilience. And there's some pretty big differences on all these actions I took being on the inside from rather than being on an outsider. Trust issues, usually coming in as a consultant, new into a project or new to a company. There's a bit of trust you have to build. People usually think that you're going to either take their job or get rid of it or make them look bad, a combination of both. Whereas on the inside, they were just worried that I was going to make them look bad. So there was a lot of explanations of why the things they were the way they were versus what the risk was and how we needed to address it. And the way I really got around this was start making assurances and trying to build that trust where, hey, I'm not going to say who made this decision, but this is something that needs to be fixed. And then something I didn't really take, or I've taken for granted as a consultant, is expectations of a timeline. As a consultant, you have a nice 6 to 12 weeks that's been budgeted out that people have dedicated time to. Internally, no. These people are very busy. So my 30, 60, 90 plan should have been more of a 3, 6, 9 month plan. Sometimes I'd have to book a meeting out a month in advance, primarily with our European and Asian counterparts, because their time zones are so different. And that kind of leads me to the next one, recruiting lead times. In Europe and in APAC, primarily India, they have to give 3 to 4 months notice before they leave a company. And it's very rarely used, or very not used. It will take you a while to actually fill in a seat if it has been vacated. So that one was a doozy. All right, so about a year into the program, I started making our fixes. So what did I actually achieve alongside of my team? We're now involved in projects. We're at the beginning of the process. We're currently trying to get injected in the procurement process or even earlier so we know what's coming down the pike. But before, where we were just pulling in with systems that were already 80% or all the way built, we're actually part of the change review boards and project acceptance boards. So we get to inject our security architects into those decisions and start identifying risks where they actually can make changes before they start implementing. And there's a lot less hostility. Cultural change is always the hardest. After a year, I can't say we're like, sitting in a circle playing bongo drums and singing Kumbaya, but the level of hostility has gone down. But that's not to mean that, we aren't slipping back into old habits, but you have to take each of those meetings and each of those incidents incrementally and try to build off of them into a better place of trust. And now we have formal processes. There's now a formal process of when to engage my team. People know how, when, and why they should be bringing in my cybersecurity architecture engineering team. And we have a formal risk register now. Instead of having 3, 4 Excel spreadsheets where no one really saw what was going on with them, it's in a single unified register which gets brought to leadership's attention so they know what risks that they are incurring and what they should be doing to fix them. And so reflections on our continued progress. Several months ago, I picked up a book called Crucial Conversations, and it has been really informative for me on how I approach discussions with business partners. For a long time, I really relied on how I operated in the Air Force as a sergeant, which is very, very direct and not really caring about emotions. And this book really helped me align where emotions can actually be a help and an aid in pretty tough conversations. And then giving it time. Cultural change is very incremental, especially when you're across oceans. And the only way you can talk to people is on Teams meetings. So just being a little bit easier on yourself on, maybe it'll take 6 months instead of, 2 to implement a change that you want. And just being okay with that. And I'd like to give a special thank you to some people in my life, my beta testers and my mentor. My wife, Kate, who walked me through on what I was doing wrong with this conversation that I'm having with you guys. Kaylee Smith, Lindsay Bauer, some previous colleagues of mine, and my mentor, Roy Diano. And then my current team, Alex Stravulakis, Chase Muth, Josh Lynn, and Jay Van Dam. They have done the lion's share of a lot of the work I claim I did over here, because they were having a lot of the actual day-to-day conversations that I couldn't get to as my purview was a lot larger. And then to HUSECCon for having this opportunity to have this conversation with you guys about this. So now, I kind of blazed through this because I was nervous, but any questions? All right, Grayson.
Testing 1, 2. There you go.
First of all, thank you, Brian, for being here as Brian Unfiltered. I know this is not something you love doing as public speaking. Appreciate your insights. One question I have is, was there anything you've learned, breaking down the communication barriers with the folks in the plant? Is there any, leveraging any analogies or icebreakers that you found as kind of the non-smelly kid at the lunch table? How do you get them to conversate with you?
Letting them know that we're not here to be an office of no. Like, we want to enable you, but there might be some additional controls we'll have to put in place. I think going from where they were being constantly told no to things to actually saying we're going to help you do the things that you want to do was a really big shift. And then analogies, maybe coming from the defense mind, I've always likened cybersecurity to trench warfare, and that really, the plant people really understood that for some reason. Any other questions?
Yep, give me a second.
Thank you. Question: when facing opposition or resistance from the plant personnel, can you tell a story or give more insight how you handled that specifically?
Yeah,
for people who didn't. Well, I mean, add on that. People who didn't want to change. They said, "No, I don't like what I'm seeing. I hate this. This is."
Yeah. So there was a decision to rip out DMZs at a company I worked at before, primarily to make it easier for a single unified system. And coming back in and seeing that, I really didn't agree with that design decision. So as part of our new standard, we're saying, no, you need to have DMZs. And so it was really just showing what the value add of that DMZ was and how it can enable a bit more efficient plant operations and to reduce the amount of times that they're going to be attacked and the blast radius of that attack. That really helped us get their insight and go, oh, that's why we need to be doing this.
My question was, and I know part of the answer is going to be, well, a collection of what I went over.
Yeah.
Right now, the state of OT, it's been said, you might chuckle at this one, OT cybersecurity currently rides on the back of automation projects. So when dealing with that scenario, although it's a collection of what you stated, totally agree with it, great presentation. What, I can't say a one-word answer, but a couple of sentences, what would you do to try to break that cycle with dealing with a customer that is just textbook, black and white, just like that, where OT, cybersecurity is only implemented in incremental little projects? Where would you try to stab at that without you charging me for that advice?
I mean, it's really hard to get everything you want done at once. I don't think it is a kind of like a push and pull and kind of get success where you can. So you need to look at what the most risk is at that plant and seeing where you can get it resolved. Unless that plant has been taken down by a huge cybersecurity attack and they've been down for a week and had to get hardware actually replaced, it's going to be a really hard sell to say, well, you need to stop everything you're doing and do everything I say.
Yeah. It's funny how they come back after something's happened.
Well, I mean, you always have to ride that wave, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think everyone who's been here for a while knows that ride.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
One more second. Moving very fast here, guys. No, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to trip.
Good morning. Thank you.
Oh.
My challenge.
Yeah.
My challenge has always been not so much with the stakeholders, but it's trying to get the vendors on board. I mean, hey, this has been good since 2005. I know, but that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you try to work with them or help them understand that 20 years ago isn't good enough today?
Well, unfortunately, I have to work around them. They have too much power. Until organizations start collectively coming together and forcing, your vendors to do things more securely, which hopefully Congress gets off their ass and does, we're going to be having to work around their limitations and architect around it. Yeah.
What kind of documents did you generate as part of this process? Trying to communicate to people, why we do these things. A several hundred-page SSP just doesn't really come across. So can you give some pointers of what kind of document you generated?
So I did generate a lot of documents out of this, but I would say the most important one is the risk register, because it'll document, if you haven't aligned your risk program to enterprise risk management to where your executive leaders actually know what risk means, so you're not speaking a different language, and a critical risk means so much money in revenue or so many lives lost, you're going to have a pretty rough time getting everyone to read it. So just compiling it down to one slide with terms that your C-suite knows, if you're a publicly traded company, will be very beneficial. And it was the most aid for us.
So you brought up one of the points being cybersecurity dismissed. How do you get it to getting respect to cybersecurity and things like that?
It's a lot of one-on-ones with those executive leaders and showing, what their perceptions were and really going against them. So for us, ours were, well, our previous CISO said we could do this. And it's going back to that risk-based conversation of showing, well, here's maybe some recent attacks or historical evidence of why this architecture or this process failed, and showing that you know what you're doing.
Quick question. You mentioned using the C2, M2, and NIST CSF in this process.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I said, yeah.
Yeah. In doing that, was that helpful in the non-technical and technical leadership understanding, it's not just subjective or objective, what your opinion is, this is a metric and here's where we're at? Is that helpful in this process for them to understand where they need to be in a target state?
Yes. I mean, that's what they're looking for, is something in a non-technical means, a number that they can say, hey, we're good, at least from the board perspective. And using the C2, M2, there was a little bit of explanation because they didn't know what that was. There's a bit of education we had to do to evangelize why we're moving to that model.
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, I know you mentioned a lot of change, and I think really sometimes the technology is not the hardest thing to change, it's the people. So what are things that you would tell your teams to sort of help with the change, right? I know you're leading it, but
Yeah.
you have players underneath you that need to sell the change as well too. What are some things maybe to help with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest thing was knowing what hill to die on. We can get some blinders on what we think is the most risk, and saying that this shouldn't go forward because it'll generate too much risk, but we're not really here to prevent them from making those bad decisions. We just have to inform them of those bad decisions.
In your opinion, what's one of the best ways to get junior analysts and junior professionals that are coming into the industry to buy into the idea of the bigger picture? I know it took me a long time to understand it, and so I'd like to find ways to help expedite them learning so they don't have to go through the same struggles and the errors to that. So what's a good way to help teach them?
I think the simplest way is, take what I said, put it in your own words that that they'll understand, and just have those frank conversations with them. And your past experiences, just drawing from those, so it makes it a more personal connection, and just being there on a weekly basis with them, the check-ins, and seeing how they're doing mentally, and how they're taking, if something hasn't been done that they wanted really to get done. It's a lot of time being a leader.
I was going to ask a question. Have you ever beaten your boss at pickleball?
Oh, no. Don't play that sport. I know I'm a millennial, but not that kind of millennial.
Would you if you could?
Would I if I could? Probably.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for your insight there. One thing of significance that I noted was a 30-60-90 plan.
Yeah.
Initially, when I was hired on as an OT advisor for a major oil and gas corp, I did exactly that, initiated that game plan. And it was new. It was like something unheard of to some of the collaborators and people in that space because they're so distinctively live in their separate silos.
Yeah.
That was something new. And then even and something that you mentioned, the action plan, I did that. And still, just want to let everybody know that even if you have this 30-60-90 plan initiated, you will get pushed back or even ridicule at times because they don't understand that that's mechanics that we implement to learn more and create baselines, then initiate our advisory, and then we go to step 3 is implementation. We give them the gold, silver, bronze package, management chooses, depending on capital allocation, and then we initiate. But some of the challenges is when they call it a project, but what does a project entail? C-suite stewardship, capital allocation, a budget, and then a timeline or plan.
Yeah.
But if I don't have any of those items, you can't call it a project. You have to call it an assessment or analysis.
Yeah.
I did that for 2 years until it was ultimately shelved.
Oof. Yeah. Now, luckily,
That's really frustrating, man. It is. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, that is super frustrating. Luckily, my office was pretty new. They didn't have an architecture engineering team. They had desperate teams that were doing that. And so consolidating it, having a new leader in there, and it did have C-suite visibility, so they wanted to know what was going on here. And that was a huge boom.
Resource.
Yeah.
For OT cybersecurity.
What was that, sir?
A named resource for
Yeah.
OT cybersecurity, and that was where they were kind of
Yeah.
left it at that.
Yeah. Sorry you had
Thank
to deal with that, though. That does suck.
One more. Hang on a second.
I'm very glad I rushed through this then. There's a lot of questions.
You left plenty of time for these great questions.
I
Thank
know.
you.
Brian, long time no see. How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing, Jamie?
Pretty good. I used to work with Brian at Chicago Bridge and Iron. So
Yeah.
you were in consulting for a while, and then you went back to industry.
Yeah.
What's the, when you were in consulting at Slalom, you probably had to do something similar, digital transformation, transforming organizations and cybersecurity. How do you find it different from being in industry?
Oh, frustrating on the inside because like coming in from consulting, they had dedicated time and budget, whereas like what I want to accomplish will have to take years and continually get approval year over year for budgets.
Just raise your hands. I'll see you.
Yeah. Oh, over here.
What kind of attire do you wear when you're going to these plants? And are you talking chemical plants? Or are you
Chemical
talking
plants.
Okay. Tell us what you dress like.
Jeans, and then I just do a polo, and then when at some of the plants, we actually have to wear like coveralls, PPE. I wear my steel-toed boots that I have from the military.
Do you wear a hard hat?
Yes, PPE. Yeah,
Have
glasses.
you ever taken a picture of yourself
No.
in that outfit going to do
No.
that? No?
I'm not lame.
Following up on the consulting side of things, do you continue to work with consultants in your current role, and has your previous experience and your current experience changed how you work with consulting companies?
Yeah, I'm very hard on consultants. 'Cause I know what we're paying for them, and I know that they have good expertise, and I don't accept anything less than that. But I also primarily hired consultants, so it's been pretty easy transition when I had to fill roles. I think like 3 out of the 4 positions I hired were from consulting companies. So it's been really easy to have that way of working continue.
Can you name the tiers or the different tiers of consulting companies you've worked with?
I'm not going to be recorded saying that. Do you mean tiers as I rate them personally, or like?
Let's say the difference between the big name super and then the middle and then the lower tier.
The big tiers will come with an army. The mid tier, it's a pretty good spot to be in because they're pretty hungry. And the low tier, it's more staff augmentation. So it's been okay to fill a role for a pretty short time. But I like to work more in the mid tier. The high tier is who you want someone to blame if something goes wrong.
So one of your points was talking about culture and how difficult culture is to deal with.
Yeah.
Do you bring a baseball bat? Do you bring a fishing lure? What do you bring?
More of a fishing lure. I read up on, cause primarily our company is like a lot of people in Amsterdam, so just learning how the Dutch operate and then actually having to deal with overseas operations.
Let me interrupt you. What about alcohol?
That actually would require a travel budget, which we didn't have. So virtual drinks we've had.
Okay. There's a couple more burning questions in here. I can see it on people's faces, so just feel comfortable that you can ask what you want.
Grayson again.
Thank you.
Not necessarily in your current organization, but what's the biggest no-no you've seen in consulting that you think is a bleeding heart, like an aha moment?
How they're not putting in the effort. They think that they can bring a deliverable they've done from another company and bring it to a new client. That's like been the thing that pissed me off the most.
Yep.
Kaylee.
Hang on. How are you?
Thank you. I really liked your know thyself quadrant. I think a lot of leaders don't have that self-awareness, which I think is really important. So tell me a little bit about how you've had success in managing up with the idea that culture starts at the top, even thinking through like where security reports in the organization and changing the mindset of leaders and people that you work for.
Yeah. So I have a pretty informal relationship with my CISO. So it's been a lot of arguments on sometimes of how we actually do things. And then part of those arguments is, well, this is how I've, in my experience, how I've seen it done and how it'd be successful. And I'm willing to do what you want because ultimately this is your program, but just letting him know up front that I don't think it'll succeed. And having a good enough leader to recognize that those kind of conversations are necessary and friction is a part of the job was pretty crucial. Reporting structure. All of them are going to have different caveats to them. Like when you're reporting to finance, it's all going to be about availability and how much money the company's going to be making. The CIO is going to be concerned about the availability and uptime of his servers. And then I've seen some where it's legal, where it's like, they're mainly concerned about not getting sued.
There you go.
So it's a little bit follow-up to the org structure, where to put the product and OT security versus traditional IT security.
Yeah.
So we saw in the last decade, especially OT and industrial control cybersecurity, a lot of our big organizations created this role, chief product security officer, generally reporting to a CTO or equivalent in the company.
Yeah.
But we see this trend going backward again, and those product security organizations is starting to go back to IT CISO, traditional CISO. Maybe you have a lower level, not chief, but a director leading that.
Yeah.
How do you see this thing shaping out?
So I want to make sure I understood your question. Your question is like, how do I see it shaping out? Like, instead of having one CISO be in charge of both OT and IT, you're having a dedicated like OT director, and that's their sole remit. I think it depends largely on the size of the organization, if they have enough bandwidth to do it. But I think a lot of CISOs don't have a lot of OT knowledge, and so they try to bring a lot of solutions that fit in IT but not in OT. And so there's a lot of disconnect and anger from the plant when that happens.
Did I miss somebody? There are more burning questions. Can I ask one?
Yeah.
The difference between the perception of what you do from a company that has not yet had their worst day
Yeah.
versus the one that is in the middle of their worst day.
My perception of the companies?
Yes.
It's just they didn't know what they didn't know. It was either not communicated effectively or was ignored.
Perception of you by those companies.
Oh, perception of me by those companies.
Yes.
From the people who haven't been hit yet, they're probably thinking we're doing a lot. But the people who are in the midst of an incident or a breach are probably saying like, yeah, maybe we should have, implemented some of these controls to reduce a blast radius. Maybe not all of our production lines would be down, or maybe not like all of the European airport agencies.
Did they look at you differently when they are aware of how much a bad day costs versus when?
Oh yeah, they listen to you quite more keenly when that loss is fresh, but nothing erases that knowledge more than time. So it's just survivor's bias at points.
Does that impact their culture once they've been hit, where they had not been before?
The lower levels it does, but I think the upper leadership tends to be shuffled out quite frequently.
Also depends on who considers something material, which is usually a CFO.
Yeah.
If it's a multi-billion-dollar company, a $3 million hit isn't going to be. One more time. It also depends on who considers something material. If it's a CFO at a multi-billion-dollar company, a $3 million ransomware fee is not going to hit them. So I'm like, all right, well, as the cybersecurity consultant, why don't you cut me a check for $3 million? I'll get all the security tools I need instead of paying some ransomware agent. It just behooves me.
Yeah.
But it just depends on who thinks it's material.
Yeah.
We have about 3 more minutes, so just a couple more questions.
Yeah, if there is any. Chase.
Yeah, I'm leaving one company, going to another one, and it's kind of a similar situation. I walked into one 13 years ago, had nothing, right? And I've walked into another one that has stuff, but it needs a lot of maturity. My challenge running into these are the risk appetite isn't defined, so I'm trying to define. You were talking about risk, which is great.
Yeah.
How do I don't want to put the fear of God in them, but I want to be able to say a $49,000 loss. Is it a low? Is it high? Is it medium? Is it a $2 million loss?
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I'm struggling right now and trying to build up. I got a board report to do in 2 weeks and come up and say, hey, this is where the priorities need to be, and you need investment here. But I want to do it with risk, but they don't have a risk appetite. So I was trying to figure out how to jump around that.
You could try to, depending on the size of your industry, if you have if there access to reports on what the typical risk appetite is, or you can talk to the CFO if they exist, anyone who works in finance who makes a lot of financial decisions, and go what would be an acceptable loss, for the company, and then just base it off of that. If there's a health and safety office, if you're dealing with OT risks where there is a chance of loss of life and limb, go, when do we care if someone loses a finger, an arm, or their life, or what happens to the environment?
Hey, Brian, great presentation. The question I wanted to ask was around, obviously, we're in a chemical manufacturing setting versus more regulated industries like electrical, where you have something like a NERC SIP to kind of fall back on to say, hey, I'm not necessarily the bad guy who's kind of pushing all of these controls on you. It's the NERC SIP people.
Yeah.
How do you kind of balance that in more of a unregulated or less regulated industry?
Yeah. Thank you for the compliment, but I do pay you to give them. But so how to be the bad guy? It's more of that anchoring on what the people at the plant care about, and showing historically there have been a lot of attacks, and based on your architecture, this is the likelihood of the attack, and this is going to affect your bonus. So we're wanting to help you not make less money. We want to make you more money.
I'll ask one last not stupid question, but
there are no stupid questions, only stupid people.
Oftentimes, the only parties outside of cyber that folks don't want to talk to is legal.
Yeah.
And there's a really good legal talk coming up after this. But just curious from your perspective, where are you at with talking with internal or external counsel about these risks? Really, they're not your risks. They're other parties' risks and the business's risk. How do you get the right parties that are maybe non-technical legal folks to make sure they understand where they're at, where they need to be?
So we have like so we actually report to like legal, and there's like a bi-weekly meeting with him where we explain to him everything that's going on with the program and what risks are occurring, and a lot of the education process happens during that meeting. So having a regular connect with those important people. I'm not on all of those because it's the CISO's relationship with that individual, but I help prepare him for those meetings to explain that in better terms than, this vulnerability is going to cause ransomware by APT24. They're not going to give a shit about that. It's going to be like there's a risk that this plant's going to go down that's going to cost us, $2 million a day. I think that's it.
Great job.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much. Nicely done. Thank you. Nicely done. Thank you.
you.